Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Wednesday, which means it is time for our weekly high school football preview. Desmond Johnson here in the house. Winston Salem Journal prep beat writer Marc Pruitt joining me. Special surprise, we've got Dave Polaski from WSJS Sports, who handles their play-by-play there for high school football. He'll be joining us as well. We'll talk about East Forsyth, West Forsyth. It's probably the biggest game in the county this upcoming Friday. We've got a couple of big ones going on across the Triad. There's going to be really critical for seeding. Shout out to Drew Dull over at East Forsyth. He is their varsity baseball coach, but he's also my RPI guy. So he's actually got a first run of the RPI in the West for a regional. We'll see where everybody's kind of sitting right now and some scenarios on what may happen after this regular season finale on Friday. Let's go ahead and get into it. It's the Desmond Johnson Show.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city need that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed whacked. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's fourth and inches. I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And welcome back into the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. You can catch us Wednesdays and Fridays. We'll be back on our Tuesday tilts. We were doing those when we first came on, and then had some things that started going on with my schedule, so I couldn't do Tuesdays for a little bit. But we'll be back on Tuesdays. Jalen Gilkey, David Glenn, company, they'll be back with us here shortly. But Wednesdays have been designated for high school football, and we'll have that pretty much until Christmas time as we follow through the state playoffs. Marc Pruitt joining me from the Winston Salem Journal, prep beat writer. And if you're familiar with his work, every week he drops his big three, his top three games in the Triad. Again, we've got Dave Pulaski coming in at around 12:45. He'll help us preview East Forsyth versus West Forsyth. So I'm pretty sure it's probably one of Mark's games. It'll be on WSJS, but of course, you know, we're the home for East Forsyth Sports Network here at Tobacco Road. You can catch me and Hot Rod Funderburk on the call for that game. Kickoff is 7:30 because everybody in the Triad is going to be there. Apparently, my 48 is going to be there. WSJS is going to be there. Of course, we're there in our normal spot. I think Mark might be showing up there. So everyone will be there, and East Forsyth will be there to have a party. But before we get to that game, Mark, there's another game going on over in Guilford County, and I'm pretty sure it's probably one of your top three games of the week. Let's just dive into them. What do you got for us?
That one is. I was debating which one to talk about first. I didn't realize East Forsyth was playing this Friday, though. Is that
I didn't know. Yeah.
I'll have to look at that then. Yeah. Let's talk about Guilford County first then. Two undefeateds going at it for conference championship. Grimsley, who's stacked, loaded, and Northern Guilford, kind of a surprise team, also undefeated coming into this one. Coach Eric Westberg's got those guys rolling this year. Great quarterback, Jackson Kemp. He's thrown for about 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns. He's got a two-headed running back attack with Dwight Hall and Amari Akers. They've combined for about 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns. So he's got that offense going. He and Coach Kevin Wallace at West are really tight. They used to coach together, and they employ a lot of the same offensive schemes. So that one should be a fun one. I don't know that they got the firepower to catch Grimsley, but it would probably be fun to watch it to see if it could happen. Grimsley's just so loaded with everyone. Faison, Mitchell, the great defense they have. So I think all eyes on Guilford County will be on that one Friday night for sure.
So a couple notes on that game right now, and we're going to look at the RPI here in just a bit, but both those teams are in the top three for the West 4A and RPI. So this could very well be a game that determines who's going to be the one seed with home field advantage throughout the Western playoffs in 4A, which in my opinion is the toughest region out of all the classes. It's not as heavy as it was last year, because last year you still had like Chambers and some others that were still kind of around, but you've got teams like Independence who got all the way to the Western Regional Final and lost to Weddington. You've got, of course, your Grimsleys and your East Forsyths. But like you mentioned, this Northern team kind of came out of nowhere. No one expected them to be 9-0 going into their regular season finale against Grimsley. And from my understanding, they're a young team, so that they're going to kind of be around next year too, right?
Definitely one of the younger teams. I think he's had. I want to say they were 5-5 last year going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they were like 500. Yeah.
And Coach Westberg knows what he's doing. He's a great offensive mind, and obviously he's got those guys confident, believing in each other going into this one. I was texting with him this morning in a little bit. He's excited. This is about the time of the week where he kind of shuts down until game day. He and Wallace kind of have that in common, but they're ready. They'll be ready, I think. And I know this will be one of those. He came in after the regime of Johnny Roscoe winning the state championships or however many they won during Roscoe's tenure. And he's trying to build his own legacy over there. And this would be probably the calling card win for him if they can pull it off.
Grimsley has not lost a Metro 4A conference game since 2019. So, that would be huge for Northern Guilford if they're able to knock off Grimsley. That's at Grimsley, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So we Chase Williams and Coach Willamy will be on the call for that this Friday, 7 o'clock pregame, 7:30 kickoff. It'll be our WCOG high school football game of the week. You can hear it on 1320 AM in Greensboro, or you can hear it on 105.3 FM out in Guilford County. Give us your second game of this regular season finale.
Well, I'll hold off on the other one we're going to talk about.
We'll get that in just a little bit.
There's a lot of great games, I think, that are they're either for conference championships or for playoff seedings that are going on. And a couple even that I think if teams can win might pull them into that top 32 in the RPI. One of those would be Reynolds and Reagan playing against each other. I think Reynolds has a shot. This will be Joe Davidiak's second season. If they could beat Reagan, who is solidly in the top, I want to say 15, 18, something, wherever they are.
They're pretty much in, yeah.
I think it would do a lot for Reynolds to get into that top 32. The other ones I would want to mention, Oak Grove is playing Central Davidson. I think Oak Grove has already wrapped up the conference. Central Davidson has one loss coming into this game. Both are going to the playoffs in the 3A. But that's always the fun when you get the Davidson County teams kind of stacking up against each other. Both coaches are in their second years there. Rob Creson's doing great things at Oak Grove. He was a longtime assistant there. And Jonathan McIntosh is in his second year at Central Davidson. He coached under Adrian Snow at West Forsyth for, I think, 12 years before he got the job at Central. So I think that's an intriguing matchup. And also West Oaks and Walkertown playing for probably the number 2 seed in that conference for the playoffs. Trip Honeycutt's in his first year. Walkertown doing great things. I'm going out there later today to present their wide receiver, Mike Trincurry. He was voted as our player of the week this week for high school football for last week. Actually.
That's great.
And West Oaks is cruising along. Trent Loman's in his first year there after having a really great run at East Surrey, where he won a state championship in 2019 or 20, somewhere around there. So West Oaks is coming in one loss, and both teams, their only loss in conference play was to Reedsville. So Reedsville's got that locked up for state playoffs situations. But I think getting that 2 seed or the 3 seed out of that conference going to go take them a long way once the playoffs get here.
Yeah, shout out to Coach Trip Honeycutt and Walkertown having a fantastic year. Glad he finally got a chance to coach closer to home. I know he was, I think, South Davidson last year.
Last 2 years.
Last couple of years, yeah. So
both years with those guys, which was the first time that had happened in quite some time. I don't know the exact number of years, but he's also in the Kevin Wallace and Eric Westberg discipleship. He coached under both of them at a couple of different places.
Oh wow, I did not know that. Okay, so
they're very close, and they share a lot of the same schemes and formations and everything else. Great offensive mind.
I need to check Walkertown out. I've actually had a couple of people ask me about, what about Walkertown in terms of maybe a sports network or something, because they have a pretty good basketball program over there too.
Richard Daniels does a great job with those guys with the basketball team. I think they got to the 3rd or 4th round of the playoffs last season. And I know winter sports practice starts today, Desmond. So
I know. I have A&T basketball Monday. Like they're playing, I think Cheyenne or something like that Monday at 7. And me and Rod, we were leaving the nest last night, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for next week, because next Tuesday is election day. Right. And then the Tuesday following that, I actually have an A&T basketball game I have to produce. So we were trying to figure out one of those weeks we were going to skip because of the way they're doing the playoffs, where they're kind of they built that bye week in there. Right. But we didn't know if we want to do it on election night or not. And I'm like, more than likely, we're probably going to be doing a show for East next Tuesday. And those are live at J Peppers. You can catch those every Tuesday night at 7:30. And everyone's welcome to attend. We'll probably do that week and then skip the following week going into their first round game and going from there. And that's just a programming note I kind of just made up here on the fly. But when it comes to Walkertown, I typically, and if anybody knows me, the schools I select, I'm really particular about the schools I pick. And the reason why I hadn't really gone to Walkertown, it kind of checks off all the boxes of things that I'd want in a school to go and build a network for. They have their own town. They have their own sponsors. They're kind of inclusive, that kind of thing. The stadium is gorgeous. I love going to Walkertown Stadium. It's beautiful. It's one of the newer ones in the county, but they're a 2A school, so it's a smaller school. So unless I know for a fact that school has a lot of school support from alumni and faculty and the surrounding area, then it may or may not work to build a sports network there where it's feasible for them. But I've talked to Coach Honeycutt a couple of times. I love the fact that he's brought this new flavor into this program and ignited some stuff there, because for a while Walkertown was just kind of a feeder school, to be honest. They would have athletes there and then they get sent off to other places when they got to upperclassmen. But it feels like they're kind of building something over there with Tripp. So I know me and him, I've been trying to get him on the show, but his planning is not during the show when we're live. And some of the other coaches we talked to, their planning is like all day. So they can literally make him move stuff around to get on the show live. And we were going to pre-tape something. I might do that anyway before the start of the playoffs. I might just pre-tape a couple of coaches together and do that during the bye week. Waiting on Dave to come through. He should be popping through here in just a minute. Let's go ahead and get into your third game here. And if he pops in while we're talking about it, he can give us his thoughts on it, because SJS will be out there also. But of course, it's the WTOB high school football game of the week. It's the regular season finale. There's a lot at stake in the Central Piedmont Conference. Give me your third game for Friday.
Well, I heard there was a game going on in Kearns.
A little game. Yeah, it's a little game. In K-Bays.
And this is, to me, this is always the fun one of the year, because typically it'll come down to West Forsyth and East Forsyth, one way or the other. Mount Tabor's been in that mix this year, the last couple of years. Davie County was sort of in the mix last year for a little while, but West and East coming together again. The stakes are a little different this year because East is undefeated, and then Tabor has one loss, West has one loss, and Tabor beat West. So the chaos scenario, which we kind of talked about Monday night with Kevin Wallace at the show, if West can beat East, then the three of them are tied for first place, and then they have to go to a coin flip for who gets the number one seed for the conference and the state playoffs.
Look, I'm just saying right now, I'm the voice of the Eagles. I do their Hall of Fame ceremony. I do their football and basketball and everything else. If I did all these games for East and watched them on a running clock, every game but Mount Tabor, which they still won, for them to have their season come down to a coin flip because they lose to what? Like I don't have hair, but I will pretend like I'm pulling it out.
You got the goatee there.
Yeah, I do have the goatee thing going on. I mean, I'll just yank that out. But that would drop me. I can't imagine Coach Willard if it comes down to that scenario and they got to depend on a coin toss.
It doesn't seem right, I know, and it's just, I don't know. It's just kind of one of those things. But there's no other way to do it since the three of them had all beaten each other, and they don't go by points scored and all that other stuff anymore. So
enjoy it while you can, because there's no telling if the CPC will even look like this next year with the classifications going to 8.
We will still see a lot of these guys play each other depending on where most of them end up. I mean, it's obvious that West and Reagan are going to end up in 8A, but hopefully they can split some of these conferences, have 8A and 7A, so that a lot of the local teams can still play against each other. Yeah,
because there was that stretch where East and West weren't in the same conference because West was in 4AA or whatever, and they still would book against each other. Actually, back then, that was the Labor Day game. They would play it like week 3 before everybody went off for Labor Day, be East versus West or whatnot. And once they got in the same conference, then it started moving stuff around. But yeah, you're right. I think West, Reagan, I think Northwest, Guilford, and maybe Northern are all going to be in 8A.
It won't be Northern.
No, not Northern. Northern probably in 7A.
7 or even 6. I know they've got a pretty low enrollment for a 4A school.
Glenn's the same way. Like I expect Glenn to be in 5A, 6A, something like that, because they've only got like 1,600 kids or 1,500 kids, something like that. I think they're the smallest 4A school in the States. So
I was talking to Joe McCormick and the principal out there when I was out there 2 weeks ago for the Mount Tabor Glen game, and their numbers are such that they're hoping they can get as low as they can, because as they were saying, for their athletic teams, especially for football, it's hard to keep the players interested in coming there, because if they're getting beat up every week like they kind of have been this season, it's hard for them to the kids not to want to go transfer and play someplace else with friends or team that might have a better chance to win the conference, state championship, something like that.
So, with that. And we do have a Glenn Sports Network over there. We do cover their home football and basketball games, so they get some exposure on that end. One thing I noticed about Glenn when they played East last week in that K-Vegas Cup game, just calling it from the Glenn side in the press box, we were looking down at their sidelines and counting the 11 that were already out there playing. I think we counted only like another maybe 17 kids like on the sideline. So like their numbers have been so depleted. Yeah. It was just like you just kind of knew, like watching that game, it's like they just don't have enough. Like, don't have enough guys like out there to play with. But shout out to head coach Tommy Green. Those kids fight all the way to the end of games. Like he's trying to build something over there in his first year as they rebuild, as Antoine Stevenson's moved on and is now currently at Ragsdale. And Ragsdale's fighting for their playoff lives right now. We'll get to that in just a bit. But I want to bring in my good buddy Dave Polaski from WSJS Sports. We'll see him in Kernersville on Friday as well. I think every media outlet in the Triad will be out there doing that game. Dave and Drew Brackett will be out there calling it for WSJS. Dave, what's up, man? It's the end of a wild regular season so far here in 2024.
Yeah, it's good to see you guys, no doubt.
So we saved the best for last because we knew you were going to be at this game as well. East Forsyth, West Forsyth, kind of a battle for the CPC. There's a lot of moving parts going on here. If East loses, it opens up this Pandora's box of a three-way tie. So long as Mount Tabor wins, they have to handle their business on Friday as well. But if East wins, then they're the CPC champion outright and they're undefeated and none of this matters. But if they lose to West at home, then it's East, West, and Mount Tabor in this three-way tie. You've seen all three of these teams this year. Tell us the number one thing that stands out to you about each of those three teams in the CPC.
Well, just what's going on with this particular week, just the fact that East has the most to lose out of this entire scenario, where if they lose this game, all of a sudden you could potentially drop from a number 2 or number 3 seed in the 4A West bracket to potentially a 12 or a 13, depending on how things shake out. If you end up on the short side of that three-way coin flip, then all of a sudden you're looking at one home game in the playoffs as opposed to 2, 3, maybe even 4. So, I mean, there's a lot to lose here. For Tabor, you're pretty much penciled into that 8, 9 slot, maybe around 10, somewhere like that. West Forsyth has the most to gain potentially, because right now they're the one looking at one home playoff game as the things stand right now. And I would think if they lose, probably won't happen. It probably won't hurt them in the formula too much. They'll probably still get that home game for the first round coming up in a couple of weeks, but there's a lot for them to gain if Kevin Wallace can pull this out. So that's my initial observation just before we go into the overall oversight of these teams. That just there's so much on the line, so much to be determined out of this particular matchup.
I got to give a shout out to Tyshawn Brown too, because I don't know I think we knew, me and Mark, we talked about this early in the year, and Mark has been with us at Titans Talk on Monday nights for most of the season for West. We kind of knew it was going to be East and West. We knew it was going to be East, and we knew it was going to be West to a certain level. I don't know how many of us actually really picked Mount Tabor to be right there with them. We knew the CPC was going to be top heavy, and it was going to probably be those three teams. But the rest up, Parkland, Reynolds, the others, we kind of knew they were kind of in this mix below, and it was going to be those three up there. And we kind of knew East was going to – this was kind of East's year. They brought back a bunch of seniors. Bryce Baker's a 4-star quarterback, already signed to Carolina. They had almost all of their receiving core pretty much came back except for Josh Alston, who graduated. And then they just, like manna from heaven, they get this kid from Georgia, Corey Blair, who's a 3-star in Georgia that drops in from the sky literally about 4 or 5 weeks into the season. And they've been using this kid like a Swiss Army knife. He plays wide receiver. He plays running back. He's probably had 2 or 3 plays since he's been here that have been like the top plays for East this year, like highlight wise, in terms of he had one Friday where he knocked off this Glenn kid's helmet. we thought it was the ball. Like they went rolling down the field. We're like, oh, that's a kid telling me. Like he literally just lowers his shoulder and just he runs with such aggression. Like it's really refreshing to watch on the high school level.
He runs like he's angry at the grass.
Yeah.
I think the first game I saw him was the Tabor game, and he ran over his cousin.
Ran over Jadon, yeah. That was
Blair crying. And I joked with Tyshawn the last several weeks. I was like, how did this guy not end up at Mount Tabor? And he just,
I think his dad, I'm friends with his dad, Corey Blair Sr. I'm pretty sure he went to East. So I think that's why he ended up at East Forsyth. But you got that to deal with. This East offense is humming right now. They might have the top offense in the state, if I'm not mistaken. They're averaging over 50 points per game. The defense is only allowing 11 per game. And like I said earlier, they have been on a running clock. We've called every East Forsyth game this year, being the East Forsyth Sports Network, and we've been on a running clock every week except for that Mount Tabor game. They have literally just rolled through their roster. Oh, not the roster, their schedule. I'm a little concerned about that because they haven't really been tested other than Mount Tabor. So I'm really looking forward to a good game Friday because I do feel like West is going to bring. We all know what West is going to bring to the table. They're going to run the ball. They always have a huge O-line. Their defense is going to be sound. If Kevin Wallace has a kid that can throw the ball at quarterback, that's when they're really dangerous. And it feels like he's getting comfortable with Riley Horton being his quarterback and kind of leading that charge for West. Let me give you your thoughts on this. East and West, I can't sit here and say it's going to be an easy game for East at all. I can't sit here and say West is just going to come up into Kernersville and just do whatever they want to do. What do you think are the keys to the game for both teams to emerge from a victory and potentially CPC champ? I'll let Dave, you're the guest here. I'll let you
go. Okay. Well, I'll say one thing about Corey Blair. He brings an element to that East Forsyth running game that they haven't had since Amani Marshall was in the backfield for the Eagles and Tom
great
Willard.
Comparison. Yeah.
Kind of a slashing running back, hits that hole hard, has enough speed to get you by, but he has that kind of enthusiasm in the running game that East hasn't really had during the last couple of years. They've had those guys who are great out of the backfield, like the Jalen Murrays right now, who is such a dangerous pass catcher and can give you a bit of a change of pace in terms of the running game. But in terms of that angry type runner who can go ahead and plow forward and get you 5 yards when you need it, Corey has that, and that I think that's something that's really going to help them when they get into the playoffs, because I think that's something that was a little bit of a tough thing for them a couple of years ago, going up against the Charlotte schools in the playoffs. Against Independence last year, they didn't have that hard-nosed guy. Against Huff a couple of times, they didn't have that element to them. So I think that's really going to help them going forward. But I'm with you. When it comes to West Forsyth, they got to get out to a good start in this game. They can't fall behind and try and come back. That's just not the way that offense is built, even with Riley Horton playing with a lot of confidence at quarterback, having 4 touchdown passes in their win over RJ Reynolds last week. He's more and more confident now, but I wouldn't put them in a spot where you're facing that tough East Forsyth defense and you can get Robbie Whitney to start pinning his ears back and rush the passer on every single down. They're going to have that mix of run and pass in order to be successful.
That's a great point I think Dave made about Jalen Murray, who I think is going to be the key to the game Friday night, because West does have the cornerbacks that can match up with the receivers. I don't know, how well. And I think what Dave was saying a couple years ago with the playoffs, I think East was a little too pass happy, and I think we saw that in the Huff game, Desmond, when Quayshawn got hurt. They had nothing else to kind of get them through that one. And Jalen being that two-dimensional back that can run it and catch it out of the backfield, how is West Forsyth going to account for that Friday night? How are they going to account for Richburg and JP going down the sidelines? So, and Bryce, and I said this to a lot of people, I think Bryce Baker is the best high school quarterback I've seen around here in the last 20 years of doing this. He's just efficient. He's getting it done again this year. They've got East has a lot of weapons. And as Dave said, I think the key for West is getting out to a good start, controlling the tempo of the game through their run game, and not having to rely on Riley to beat them through the air, because I think that's going to end up costing West. They just need to keep running behind that stacked offensive line that they have, control the tempo, and make it a time management game. I think keep East Forsyth off the field as much as they can.
Yeah, I was going to say the best defense against that East Forsyth offense is trying to keep them off the field. The problem is two things that's different with this East Forsyth team I've noticed this year, because we've been calling their games really since the 2018 season when they won that first title for Willard. And this team reminds me of 2018 in a lot of ways in terms of they have a lot of different guys on offense they can get to. That 2018-19 team had a Monty Marshall on it, and they had a stable called the Horsemen basically at running back. They had like 3 or 4 kids that they were rotating in and out. And now they kind of have that with Cannon Rottweiler, with Jalen Murray, and now with Corey Blair. It's like 3 different types of runners that can do 3 different types of things. And they go out in sets where it might be Rottweiler to Baker's left and Blair to his right. And you don't know what's about to happen. Like it could be anything coming out of this formation and to anybody. The one thing I've noticed this year, though, about East that they made an intentional effort to go do, their offense and defensive lines are probably the biggest in this area, especially on offense. They are massive across the board, and their defensive front with Big Swole and Chris Kirby and Brian Godfrey, who was on the Nest last night. They've got Brian Godfrey listed at, I think, 6'4", 315. He's not 315. He's probably close to about 350, if that. And he'll tell you, like, yeah, I'm probably about 350. But he caught a touchdown pass against Glenn on Friday night. So they've got this thing rolling. I've seen them when they've had it like this before. Probably the last time was probably the 2022 team that had a senior Jalen Rayner, Quayshawn Brown was a senior, Javante Connor was at tight end, and you're right, that Huff game they had him. They had him at home. Aaron Bill was still the DC. They were allowing like 8 points a game or something, so we knew it was going to be a rock fight. And Q breaking his ankle right before halftime, right at the 50, pretty much on a run play that they really didn't need to run, to be honest, in hindsight. And it affected those kids in the second half. You could tell it on the field, and Huff ended up winning just like they did the year before, really by possession. So it wasn't like they outran them or just, threw a bunch of points up on them. And the East coaches talk about that loss a lot. Like it haunts them in terms of, we should have did this, we should have did that. So I think they intentionally went out and built a Charlotte offense and defensive line because they felt like they were getting pushed around when they got into the playoffs and saw an Independence or a Huff or whoever, especially Huff. Their defense is pretty well known, and it felt like they were getting pushed back into their backfield. I don't think they're going to be able to do that this year in terms of this O-line and what they're doing. And they've been cohesive. They've been together all year. So I'm looking forward to it because, again, I've called every East game this year. I'll be calling this one with Rod for WTOB. And we have not seen a competitive game for East except for Mount Tabor, like all year. Like it's literally just been, how fast are we going to be getting out of here tonight? Because we're going to be done by 9:30 because they already have 42 points up on the board and it's halftime or whatever. They're not going to do that to West Forsyth. So I'm not going to ask us to pick these because Mark's got to write about it. Me and Dave have to call it. Before we get out of here, though, I wanted to show these. If you know Drew Dull over at East Forsyth, he's the varsity baseball coach. He's also my RPI guy. Typically, that last game of the year, the game before, he will give me a printout that he's put together. He's also the math teacher over at East Forsyth too, so he's good with numbers and everything else. So he kind of figures out what it's going to be, and he gives us a projection. So here's our first annual Desmond Johnson Show West 4A projection for this. And I'm sorry, it's got Dave kind of marked out here because of the thing. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was going to do that.
That's all right. I'm here.
We still hear you. I'm going to get to it real quick so you don't have to be here too long.
Out because I've got more of a face for radio.
I mean, I can always switch them around just to keep it fair. Like I can do that.
We're fine. Just keep hiding me behind that.
Yes. But he's got Weddington as the 1 seed right now. He's got Grimsley as the 2, East as the 3, and Watauga at 4. Now, we talked about this off the air. Watauga's got, I think, 4 games they have to make up. And they're going to do it in this crazy 12-day stretch where they're going to play like every 3 days. But to Mark's point, the teams they're playing, they may be in situations where they can get on a running clock and get their starters off the field pretty early. So it may not be that big of a deal. But if you look at this bracket, once they get past Marvin Ridge, they're going to play either West Forsyth or Olympic in the second round. I'm more curious about what Drew had put out in terms of scenarios. And he's got it listed here. Watauga's playing 3 games over the next week, the 1st, the 5th, and the 8th. So we'll kind of know where they are after that. But they're pretty snug in their RPI. South Caldwell has 2 games left. Alexander Central has 2 games left. The top spots right now, Weddington is in the top spot. Grimsley is right behind them. But like we just said, Grimsley's playing the number 3 seed in RPI in Northern Guilford on Friday night. So that game could very well be for number 1 overall in the Western 4A throughout the playoffs. East Forsyth's taking on West Forsyth. West is 9 in RPA right now. East Forsyth is at 3. There may be some movement around those top 4 seeds. And if I go back here, to be perfectly honest with you, I like this bracket the way it is because you've got Weddington and Huff and Watauga up in that top bracket. You've got East Forsyth and Grimsley down here in this bottom bracket, along with like Northern Guilford and Independence. Mallard Creek is in there. But I could see a scenario easily where you've got Huff versus Weddington in one Western semifinal and East Forsyth and Grimsley in the other semifinal. And then the winners of that would play each other to go on to the state championship, whoever comes out of the East, probably Rollsville or Cardinal Gibbons or somebody to that effect. But thoughts on this initial projections here? And do you think with whatever happens Friday, do you think it'd be better for a team like East to not get that 2 seed and to stay at 3? Is that more of a navigatable path for them? Because you're kind of avoiding those top Charlotte schools until you absolutely have to play them. Whereas up here, I mean, literally, you're going to have to go through a number of them just to kind of get out of that top part of the bracket. But either way, it's loaded as I scroll down through it here. Northern Guilford might be 9-1 and be a 10 seed. Reagan's pretty comfortable at 18. They're sitting in there. So I don't think they're going to drop. Mallard Creek's going to be a 14 seed. East might open up versus Butler and then Mallard Creek. There's a lot to digest here. Thoughts, guys, on what you're seeing here from the brackets? And it might not be a lot of movement after Friday, except for those top 4. They might get switched around a little bit here and there. But thoughts on what Drew's put together here?
Yeah, I know. I've seen from high school OT just in the last week that Weddington jumped Grimsley for that number 1 seed, despite the Whirlies beating Page 54-7. So that could very well change going up against an undefeated Northern Guilford squad. If they can overtake the Nighthawks this week, then all of a sudden I think that might jump them back over Weddington in terms of the RPI, based on especially with what Drew has surmised based on his analysis as well. I mean, what really stood out to me just looking at that bracket is just how many Triad teams are in that lower half of the bracket and how many potential home games there are, not just from the Central Piedmont Conference where you have East, Tabor, West Forsyth all lined up for potential home games in that first round. But then you also have the Metro where you have Northern and Northwest Guilford both lined up to potentially host playoff games in addition to Grimsley. So we could be really spoiled by the number of home games that we'll have in these first couple of rounds going into the playoffs. And as we know, it's a huge difference playing at home versus getting on a bus and traveling an hour and a half to go play your opponent, especially early on in the playoffs, and especially when you're going up against a Charlotte school.
Mark, your thoughts on this? Because Northern Guilford might be hosting Page, that opening round there, which is pretty interesting. There's some interesting matchups here that I'm looking through. Northwest Guilford Independence looks like that would be a really good game to watch. Same with Sun Valley Reagan. Grimsley Davie was always interesting, although Grimsley looks like they would be able to power through most of this. Grimsley is probably better this year than last year, which is nuts because they had 2 D1 wide receivers on the outside. And I think because they have Bryce Davis the whole year, their defense is better this year. And I don't know. I've felt like all year, because Grimsley and East Forsyth are both schools that we do sports networks for here at Tobacco Road. And I felt like all year we were on a collision course with those 2 schools somewhere in the playoffs. They were going to see each other. And I was hoping it was going to be the Western Regional Final, like we got in 2019, where we got literally 2 instant classics. They played in the regular season, like week 3, and then they played in the Western 4A final to go to the state championship. And both games were at Grimsley. And I believe the score was the same. Both games, like 21-20. Yeah. Yep. And that final.
By the way, that was the last time Grimsley lost a regular season game.
Yeah.
In
That's
2019.
right.
They've won 49 in a row in the regular season since then.
They haven't lost a Metro 4A game since 2019, like a conference game. So if
2018 against Page, yeah.
2018, yeah. So if the Northern can pull that off, that's a huge feather in the cap for that program. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of big games this Friday. And then, of course, if you don't know, playoffs were supposed to start the following Friday on November 8th. They got pushed back a week so that some of the Western schools that were affected to Hurricane Helene could get a chance to catch up and try to get in there. Watauga seems like the main one that kind of understands the assignment. Like let's get these games in so we can kind of secure a spot and go from there. But you're literally talking about those 3 games, and then they're going to play a playoff game on the 15th. So they'd be playing 4 games in a 15-day stretch in high school. And I don't know. That's a lot. That's a whole lot to do. 3 days in between games. That's going to be interesting to see what happens with them, because if something happens and they lose some games they're not supposed to lose, then that might open the door for a Huff or somebody to move up into that top 4. But it's going to be interesting. We'll be with it throughout. Dave, appreciate you coming through. I know that WSJS will be having their coverage as well. And I know you guys go around the Triad, so you guys will have multiple big games throughout. And we both tend to be in Chapel Hill whenever it gets to that point. There's always somebody from here that's going to make it there, whether it's Dudley or we can usually set a clock to Reedsville being being up there doing something. So I know somebody from the Triad will probably make it. I'm hoping either East or Grimsley. Hopefully East gets all the way there to Chapel Hill and we get a chance to call those games. Because we've been, it's one of those stretches where I've been with these kids for 3 years now. And the last group that was like that was the Jalen Rayner, Quayshawn Brown group. We were with them from spring 2021. So we watched them grow like all the way up through that final season. So you get attached to some of these kids a lot of times when you're around them so often. And this particular group of East kids are pretty close to the vest in terms of they're all pretty friendly. They're not cliquish. You know what I mean? Like the whole team seems like they're on one goal. So I'd like to see how far they go. And then again, Grimsley's kind of on a mission since that spring championship to get back there. And almost did last year and just ran into a Weddington team that honestly just kind of surprised them. Tyler Budge, the quarterback, he ran for like 100 yards in that game, and he normally doesn't run at all. And I don't think they were really ready for it. And we called that game. And
Grimsley had the lead at halftime in that game too. And the second half was just a totally different story.
Right, exactly. So that game has stuck out to them. This whole year, they've had that game in the back. They want to see Weddington again somewhere down the road because of what happened there. And Weddington, of course, is the defending champ. Huff's never been to a state championship, but they've been in the discussion the past 5-6 years now. So there's a lot of heavyweights here on the west side of 4A. And of course, we'll have all that for you. Dave will be calling this game. You said 7:00 pregame on WSJS, kickoff at 7:30. Me and Rod will have it for the East Forsyth Sports Network and WTOB. Our call will parachute in at 7:30. I believe it's on TV too, but don't worry about that. Listen to either us or listen to Dave. And Mark will be in the house as well. Gentlemen, I hope that East Press Box has got a bunch of goodies. And
I was going to say, we just have to share the food nicely.
Yeah, we just got to share the food nicely. That's all. I know Alan Plaster, the AD, we already have a section over on the left end that we're at every time. I know he'll have you way down on the right.
Yeah, we tuck ourselves in that right corner. Yep.
Yeah.
we know our spot.
My 48 will be sitting kind of somewhere in there in the middle. And it's fun. It's fun to be at the nest on a Friday, especially in a game that means something, a regular season finale where we will probably not have a running clock. So I'm looking forward to it. Anybody want to give up any last things before we get out of here? Any other games of note or anything for Friday to keep an eye out on? Mark, anything you didn't mention before?
It's just a fun time of the year. Everything's kind of converging together right now with the end of the regular season for football, playoffs on the horizon. Winter sports practices start today with basketball and swimming and wrestling. So it's a fun time in the life of us high school sports.
You don't tell me. And Dave works at Learfield, so we are in crossover season right now. Yeah. Like we don't even know where we're supposed to be. Like,
I have Syracuse exhibition basketball tonight.
I think I have A&T basketball Monday. I think on the 4th they're playing Cheyenne, and then so I'm producing that, and then it's just gonna be a hot mess for like the next 2-3 weeks, especially with them pushing the playoffs down. It pushed it so that the crossover season is gonna be even longer because usually it's over by like mid-November. We're like, okay, I kind of know where I'm supposed to be. Football's thinning out. No, we're going to be knee deep in it until Thanksgiving, probably, and then high school basketball starts. So it's
soccer tonight, volleyball tomorrow, cross country Saturday. It's all going.
We're just living the dream, gentlemen. We're just living the dream. That's what gets me up in the morning. I'm like, just gotta go call some games. No big deal. So I'm gonna get us out of here. Dave, appreciate you coming through. Probably try to get you back in here during the playoffs because I'm sure those local teams are gonna be sniffing around. So and me and Mark do this every Wednesday. So for Marc Pruitt, for Dave Polaski, I'm Desmond Johnson. You've been watching the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. We will see you Friday with a new episode. We'll get through all this Carolina Panther mess that's going on right now. We'll talk to you later.